Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. My topics for tonight are Iran policy disaster, de-dollarization, and multipolar Moscow. Those are going to be very interesting things to talk about. This is my weekly long show. It occurs on Tuesday night. I normally do half-hour shows. 3 half-hour shows each on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Okay, and in addition, I do this long show on Tuesday, in which I normally discuss issues of international politics. So, I welcome you here now. And I'm going to get started with the first of our articles, which is a piece by Juan Cole that I picked up on Common Dreams. And it's a piece, well, the title, you'll see. Here's Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister for Legal and International Affairs, Reza Najafi. He's looking on during a meeting at the International Court of Justice in The Hague on the legal consequences of the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories on February 22nd, 2024. The headline is, As Palestinians Bleed, U.S. Policy Towards Iran Proves Disastrous. Despite the Republican urge to devastate Iran, the country's leaders have taken deft advantage of the butchery in Gaza, and the claims for the promise of U.S. democracy seem as diminished as ever. Juan Cole is the author of this piece. It was published on March 4th, 2024, and at Tom Dispatch. No, that is Tom Englehart's blog. And Juan starts off, in the midst of Israel's ongoing devastation of Gaza, one major piece of Middle Eastern news has yet to hit the headlines. In a face-off that, in a sense, has lasted since the pro-American Shah of Iran was overthrown by theocratic clerics in 1979, but Iran finally seems to be besting the United States in a significant fashion across the region. It's a story that needs to be told, and Juan proceeds to tell it. Quote, hit Iran now, hit them hard, unquote, was typical advice offered by Republican Senator Lindsey Graham after a drone flown by an Iran-aligned Iraqi Shiite militia killed 3 American servicemen in northern Jordan on January 28th. The well-heeled Iran war lobby in Washington has in fact been stridently calling for nothing short of a U.S. invasion of that country. And they accused Tehran of complicity in Hamas's October 7th terrorist attack on Israel. No matter that the official Iranian press has vehemently denied the allegation, while American intelligence officials swiftly concluded that the attack on Israel had taken top Iranian leaders by surprise, In mid-November, Reuters reported that Iranian leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei informed a key Hamas figure, Ismail Haniyeh, that his country wouldn't intervene directly in the Gaza war since Tehran hadn't been warned about the October 7th attack before it was launched. He actually seemed annoyed that the leadership of the Hamas military group, the Qassam Brigades, thought that they could draw Tehran and its allies willy-nilly into a major conflict without the slightest consultation. Although initially caught off guard as the Israeli counterattack grew increasingly brutal and disproportionate, Iran's leaders clearly began to see ways they could turn the war to their regional benefit. And they've done so skillfully, even as the Biden administration, in its full-scale embrace of the most extreme government in Israeli history, tossed democracy and international law under the bus. The gut-wrenching Hamas attacks on civilians at a music festival and those living in left-wing peacenik kibbutzim near the Israeli border with Gaza on October 7th initially left Iran in an uncomfortable position. It had allegedly been slipping some $70 million a year to Hamas, though Egypt and Qatar had provided major funding to Gaza at Israel's request through sanctioned Israeli bank accounts. That's something not too many people know, is it? And after decades of championing the Palestinian cause, Tehran could hardly stand by and do nothing as Israel razed Gaza to the ground. On the other hand, the Ayatollahs couldn't afford to gain a reputation for being played like a fiddle by the region's young radicals and so drawn into conventional wars their country can ill afford. The adults in the room, despite their fiery rhetoric, their undeniable backing of fundamentalist militias in the region, and their depiction by Inside the Beltway warhawks as the root of all evil in the Middle East, Iran's leaders have long acted more like a status quo power than a force for genuine change. They have shored up the rule of the autocratic al-Assad family in Syria while helping the Iraqi government that emerged after President George W. Bush's invasion of that country, fight off the terrorist threat of the Islamic State of Iraq, and the Levant, also known as ISIL. In truth, not Iran, but the U.S. and Israel are the countries that have most strikingly tried to use their power to reshape the region in a Napoleonic manner. The disastrous U.S. invasion and occupation of Iraq and Israel's wars on Egypt in 1956 and 1957, on Lebanon, 1982 to 2000 and 2006, in Gaza, 2008, 2012, 2014, and 2024, along with its steady encouragement of large-scale squatting on the Palestinian West Bank, were clearly intended to alter the geopolitics of the region permanently through the use of military force on a massive scale. Only recently, Ayatollah Khamenei bitterly asked, quote, "Why don't the leaders of Islamic countries publicly cut off their relationship with the murderous Zionist regime and stop helping this regime?" Unquote. Pointing to the staggering death toll in Israel's present campaign against Gaza, he was focusing on the Arab countries, Bahrain, also Morocco, Sudan, and the United Arab Emirates. That is part of Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner's, quote, Abraham Accords, unquote, had officially recognized Israel and established relations with it. Egypt and Jordan had, of course, recognized Israel long before that. Given the anti-Israel sentiment in the region, had it in fact been rife with democracies, Iran's position might have been widely implemented. Still, it was a distinct sign of terminal tone deafness on the part of Biden administration officials that they hoped to use the Gaza crisis to extend the Abraham Accords to Saudi Arabia while sidelining the Palestinians and creating a joint Israeli-Arab front against Iran. The region had already been moving in a somewhat different direction. Last March, after all, Iran and Saudi Arabia had begun forging a new relationship by restoring the diplomatic relations that had been suspended in 2016 and working to expand trade between their countries. That relationship has only continued to improve as the nightmare in Israel and Gaza developed. In fact, Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi first visited the Saudi capital Riyadh in November. And since the Gaza conflict began, Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdullahian has met twice with his Saudi counterpart. Frustrated by a markedly polarizing American policy in the region, de facto Saudi ruler Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and Iran's Ayatollah Ali Khamenei resorted to the good offices of Beijing to sidestep Washington and strengthen their relations further. Although Iran is far more hostile to Israel than Saudi Arabia, their leaderships do agree that the days of marginalizing the Palestinians are over. In a remarkably unambiguous statement issued in early February, the Saudis offered the following, quote, "The kingdom has communicated its firm position to the U.S. administration that there will be no diplomatic relations with Israel unless an independent Palestinian state is recognized on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital, and that the Israeli aggression on the Gaza Strip stops and all the Israeli occupation forces withdraw from the Gaza Strip," unquote. Significantly, the Saudis even refused to join a U.S.-led naval task force created to halt attacks on Red Sea shipping by the Houthis of Yemen, no friends of theirs, in support of the Palestinians. Its leaders are clearly all too aware that the carnage still being wreaked on Gaza has infuriated most Saudis. And this article is a very fine article, striking exactly the right sort of tone and describing the present situation there in terms of relations, of the Iranians with the rest of the region in a very, very clear and so far very comprehensive way. In late January, going on with the article, President Raisi also surprised regional diplomats by traveling to Ankara, Turkey, for talks on trade and politics with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, another sign of his country's changing role in the region. At the end of the visit, while signing various agreements to increase trade and cooperation, he announced, quote, "We agreed to support the Palestinian cause, the axis of resistance, and to give the Palestinian people their rightful rights," unquote. That's no small thing. Remember, Turkey is a NATO member and considered a close ally of the United States. In previous years, anyway, I have to add. But to have Erdogan suddenly cozy up to Iran while denouncing Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's war on Gaza as a Hitlerian-style genocide was an unmistakable slap in Washington's face. We must remember here, it's not the first unmistakable slap in Washington's face, because Erdogan has been cozying up to Russia for a relatively long time and collaborating fairly closely with Russia, okay, and Putin. It's had one foot out of the alliance, okay, out of the NATO alliance now for some time. Meanwhile, Iran, Turkey, and Russia, here we go, issued a joint communique that, quote, expressed deep concern over the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, stressed the need to end the Israeli brutal onslaught against the Palestinians while sending humanitarian aid to Gaza, unquote. From the Biden administration's point of view, Moscow's bombing of civilian sites in Ukraine and Iran's role in crushing Sunni Arab rebels in Syria had been the atrocities that needed attention until Netanyahu suddenly pulled the rug out from under them by upping the ante from mere atrocities to what the International Court of Justice has ruled can plausibly be labeled a genocide. One thing was clear: Washington's long struggle to exclude Iran from regional influence has now visibly failed. Iran's rising popularity. At the Gulf International Forum, GIF, last November, Abdullah Babood, a prominent a prominent Omani academic, said that there had been a, quote, very strong condemnation of Israel from Iran and Turkey, embarrassing some Arab countries that are not using the same language. My worry is that this conflict is leading to the empowerment of Turkey and Iran among the Arab public, unquote. Remember, of course, neither Turkey nor Iran, okay, are Arab nations. Okay, the Turks are Turks, okay, and the Iranians, of course, are Iranians. Neither, okay, are ethnically Arabian. GIF's executive director, Danya Thafer, concurred. Of that public, she said, quote, grief and anger have reached unprecedented levels, and added, quote, with each photo out of Gaza, Iran gains more influence across the region, unquote. In short, at remarkably little cost, Iran is unexpectedly winning the battle for regional public opinion, and its standing in the Arab world has risen strikingly. Meanwhile, the reputation of the United States has been indelibly tarnished by Washington's full-throated support for what most in the region do indeed see as a merciless slaughter of thousands of children and other innocent civilians. And not just most in the region, but millions and millions and millions outside the region, if I might add the obvious. A recent opinion poll of Arabs in 16 countries, conducted jointly by the Arab Center in Washington, D.C., and the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies in Doha, Qatar, found that 94% of them considered the American position in Israel's war, quote, bad, unquote. In contrast, a surprising 48% of them considered the Iranian position positive. To grasp just how remarkable such a finding was, consider that a Gallup poll conducted in 2022 found that Shiite Iran's name was mud in most Sunni Arab countries, and approval of its leadership fell somewhere between 10% and 20%. In recent months, Iran has made striking use of the weakness of Washington's case in the region. While the State Department likes to contrast Iran's, quote, dictatorship, unquote, with Israel's, quote, democratic character, unquote, only recently Foreign Ministry spokesperson Nasser Kanani observed, quote, the disaster in Gaza removed the mask from the face of the so-called advocates of human rights and showed the extent of vileness, brutality, and lies hidden within the nature of the Israeli regime, whose supporters used to refer to it as a symbol of democracy, unquote. Although Iran has among the world's worst human rights records, Netanyahu has even managed to take the focus off of that. Absolutely. Losing the Middle East Washington style, Iran's allies in the region include Iraqi Shiite militias like the Party of God Brigades, Makata'ib Hezbollah, which first gained prominence in the struggle against the ISIL terrorist group from 2014 to 2018. Those were years when the regular Iraqi army had essentially collapsed and was only gradually being rebuilt. Washington was also focused on destroying ISIL then, and so developed a wary de facto alliance with them in its campaign to crush that, quote, caliphate, unquote. In January 2020, however, President Trump was responsible for the drone assassination of the group's leader, Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, along with the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani, the great hero of Iran. Just after their arrival by plane at Baghdad International Airport in what was evidently an attempt to prevent them, through the Iraqis, from forging an agreement with Saudi Arabia to reduce tensions with Iran. The assassination led to a long-running, low-intensity conflict between the Shiite militias of Iraq and the 2,500 remaining American troops stationed there. They're still there, by the way. With the onset of the Gaza conflict, thank you, honey. With the onset of the Gaza conflict last October, the Party of God brigades began launching mortars and drones against Iraqi military bases hosting American soldiers, as well as against small forward operating bases in southeast Syria, where 900 U.S. military personnel is stationed, ostensibly to support the Syrian Kurds in mopping up operations against ISIL. After more than 150 such attacks on January 28th, one of their drones hit Tower 22, a support base where U.S. troops were stationed in northern Jordan, killing 3 American soldiers while wounding dozens more. Iran's leaders generally back those Shiite militias, but whether they had anything to do with the attack on Tower 22 remains unknown. The officials in Tehran did, however, immediately recognize the danger of escalation once American troops had actually been killed. And indeed, the Biden administration responded with dozens of airstrikes on bases and facilities of the Party of God in Iraq and Syria. Washington Post reporters were told by Iraqi and Lebanese officials that Iran had actually urged caution on the militias with clear effect. Their attacks on bases hosting U.S. troops ceased. At the same time, the Iraqi parliament and government complained bitterly about Washington's violation of the country's sovereignty, while heightening preparations to force the withdrawal of the last U.S. troops from their land. In other words, President Biden's fierce backing of Israel's war, his decision to increase weapon shipments to that country, and his bombing of pro-Palestinian militias may have led to the achievement of a long-standing Iranian aim, seeing American troops finally leave Iraq. Meanwhile, in southern Lebanon, where the militant group Hezbollah has been exchanging occasional fire with Israeli forces in support of Gaza, according to the Post reporters, one Hezbollah figure told them that Iran's message was, quote, "We are not keen on giving Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu any reason to launch a wider war on Lebanon or anywhere else," unquote. Wars are unpredictable, and the Lebanon-Israeli border could still erupt dramatically, which it appears to now be doing, by the way. There were 70 missiles that were sent from Lebanon into Israel today. I don't know what damage was done. Moreover, Iranian pleas for restraint appear to have had far less effect on the Houthi leadership in Yemen's capital, Sana'a, leading to an ongoing American and British bombing campaign on that city and elsewhere in that country that has so far done little to stop Houthi missile and drone attacks against ships in the Red Sea. So far, however, despite the Republican urge to devastate Iran, that country's leaders have taken deft advantage of the butchery in Gaza, in which the Israeli military has killed more civilian non-combatants each day than belligerents have in any other conflict in this century. The Ayatollahs have significantly increased their popularity even among Arab and Muslim publics that had not previously shown them much favor. They have strengthened their relationships with the Shiites of Iraq and may be on the verge of finally achieving their goal of ending the U.S. military missions in Iraq and Syria. They've also achieved closer ties with Turkey while improving relations with Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf Arab oil states. In doing so, they have distinctly blunted the Biden administration's aim of isolating Iran while tying the wealthier Arab states ever more firmly to Israel through arms and high-tech deals. In addition, through its backing and weaponizing of Israel in these last grim months, Washington has made a mockery of the human rights talking points that the U.S. has long deployed against Iran. In the process, Joe Biden has done more than any recent president to undermine both international humanitarian law and democratic principles, but globally, with 94% of Arab poll respondents viewing American policy in the region as, quote, bad, unquote, one thing is clear, for the moment at least, Iran has won the Middle East. Couldn't agree more with that. Iran has won, the Middle East, and Joe Biden has lost it insofar as the United States ever had it, and the trillions of dollars sunk into the Middle East. We have definitely lost it at this point. Not only is there now an Iran, Turkey, Saudi, and perhaps even Egypt front against us, in Gaza. There are now, of course, relations getting stronger through the mediation, of Iran to both China, and to Russia, and more generally to the BRICS effort. Once the BRICS effort really gets going in the Middle Eastern countries that have now joined, and the other ones that are likely to join sometime this year, then it's likely that the United States will have very little influence in terms of the direction of the Middle East going forward. And that is not something the U.S. did not want to see. I personally think that it might be very good for America to turn inwards for a while, take care of our problems here, try to establish a collaborative foreign policy, both close at home and in the world, in general. I think, our adventures abroad are beginning to come to a losing conclusion. Certainly, the attempt to shore up, the Middle East and our influence in Eastern Europe through the Ukraine war, these are both failures, as we see now. We see that Russia is in the ascendant, that Iran and Turkey, are in the ascendant, and that our attempt to shore up influence there so that we could move on and attack China, uh, as we seem to have been planning to do. Well, we might move on to attack China, but given that we've been failing in Eastern Europe and failing in Western Asia, it is very, very likely uh, that we don't have the resources and the international influence to isolate China, okay, in Asia as well, especially since China is far more powerful than the states we've been dealing with, both in Eastern Europe, okay, and in the United States. So I certainly want to keep that in mind as we raise our sights, okay, to other issues, okay, of geopolitics. And we're going to do that through the medium of paying attention to some of the latest efforts, okay, of Pepe Escobar. I will be there in just a minute, but I realize I neglected to share this, okay, on Facebook, and I do want to do that so people know that I'm over there. So there we are. And now let's move on. Joe Newland is resigning. Yes, I know, Andy, and I got your kind emails on that topic. I heard about it earlier today. In fact, I almost did a dance when I heard about it. Hello, Steve. Hello, D. Hello, Kay. And hello, Andy. Let's move on now to Pepe, who had some excellent later efforts, which I have picked up at the UNZ Review, which tries to represent what is going on in alternative media. And which is not banned from Facebook, at least not yet. Okay, the next piece, very excellent one, long though, it's called The Rocky Road to De-dollarization. The Sergei Glassiev interview by Pepe Escobar, February 29, 2024. Of course, this was originally published I believe in Strategic Culture, where he often publishes first, but which is not a publication that Facebook likes very much because it's too close to the center of the Russian press world. But here we go. Very few people in Russia and across the global south are as qualified as Sergei Glassiev, the Minister for Integration and Macroeconomics for the Eurasia Economic Commission, the EEC, the policy arm of the Eurasia Economic Union, the EAU, to speak about the drive, the challenges, and the pitfalls and the roads towards de-dollarization. as the global south issues widespread calls for financial stability. India, inside the BRICS 10, makes it clear that everyone needs to think seriously about the toxic effects of unilateral sanctions. And Professor Michael Hudson, who remember, is an MMTer, keeps reiterating current policies are not sustainable anymore. Sergei Glatziev graciously received me at his office at the EEC for an exclusive, extensive conversation, including fascinating off-the-record odds and ends. We're probably going to not hear about those fascinating off-the-record odds and ends. These are the highlights as Glassiev's ideas are being re-examined, and there's huge expectation for the green light from the Russian government for a new trade settlement model, which for the moment is in the final stages of fine-tuning. Glatziev explained how his main idea was, quote, elaborated a long time ago. The basic idea is that a new currency should be, first of all, introduced on the basis of international law, signed by the countries which are interested in the production of this new currency, not via some kind of conference like the Bretton Woods Conference with no legitimacy. At the first stage, not all countries would be included. BRICS nations will be enough, plus the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Does that mean that all the countries in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization would be included? I wonder, because that's a lot of countries. In Russia, we already have our own SWIFT, the SPFS, says Pepe. Or actually, this is this is a quote from Glatziev. We have our own currency exchange. We have correspondent relations between banks, consultation between central banks. Here we are absolutely self-sufficient, unquote. All that leads to adopting a new international currency. Quote, we don't really need to go large scale. BRICS is enough. The idea of the currency is that there are two baskets. One basket is national currencies of all countries involved in the process, like the SDR, the special drawing rights, which exist in the West, but with more clear, understandable criteria. The second basket are commodities. If you have two baskets and we create the new currency as an index of commodities and national currencies, and we have a mechanism for reserves, according to the mathematical model, that will be very stable and convenient, unquote. Well, since they think that, I hope they have been doing some serious simulations using the mathematical model. Because even if the mathematical model seems in principle stable, you really need the simulation to see what the possibilities are to test the stability of the model. Then it's up to feasibility. Quote, to introduce this currency as an instrument for transactions would not be too difficult. With good infrastructure and all central banks approving it, then it's up to business to use this currency. It should be in digital form, which means it can be used without the banking system, so it will be at least 10 times cheaper than present transactions through banks and currency exchanges. I just briefly saw something on the Lena Petrova website. Okay, and by the way, when it comes to considerations of the national debt and how serious a problem, the United States has, she's another moron about this, but she has been following the BRICS currency possibilities very closely, and she said that there was an announcement, today, I haven't confirmed it yet, that the digital currency has now been completed by the Russians. That is to say, the software for it is there. It's based on a blockchain. And the question now is whether it will be widely adopted and will become part of the BRICS currency we've been talking about here. That thorny central bank question, quote, have you presented this idea to the Chinese, unquote? Quote, we presented it to Chinese experts, our partners at the Renmin University. We had good feedback, but I did not have the opportunity to present it on a political level. Here in Russia, we promote the discussion via papers, conferences, seminars, but there's still no political decision. This is a very long quote, of course, on introducing this mechanism even on the BRICS agenda. The proposal by a team of experts is to include it in the agenda of the BRICS summit next October in Kazan. The problem is the Russian central bank is not enthusiastic. The BRICS have only decided on an operating plan to use national currencies, which is also a quite clear idea, as national currencies are already used in our trade. The Russian ruble is the main currency in the EAU. Trade with China is conducted in rubles and renminbi. Trade with India and Iran and Turkey also switched to national currencies. Each country has the infrastructure for it. If central banks introduce digital national currencies and allow them to be used in international trade, it's also a good model. In this case, crypto exchanges can easily balance payments, and it's a very cheap sort of mechanism. What is needed is an agreement from central banks to allow a certain amount of national currencies in digital form to participate in international transactions. Quote, would that be feasible already in 2024 if there's a political will? Quote, there are some startups already. By the way, they are in the West, and the digitalization is conducted by private companies, not central banks. So the demand is there. Our central bank needs to elaborate a proposal for the summit in Kazan, but this is only one part of the story. The second part is price. For the moment, price is determined by Western speculation. We produce these commodities, we consume them, but we do not have our own price mechanism which will balance supply and demand. During the COVID panic, the price for oil fell to nearly zero. It's impossible to make any strategic planning for economic development if you do not control prices of basic commodities. My idea is based on a mechanism that existed in the Soviet Union in the Comecon. In that period, we had long-term agreements, not only with socialist countries, but also with Austria and other Western countries to supply gas for 10 years, 20 years. The basis of this price formula was the price for oil and the price for gas. So what stands out is the effectiveness of a long-term, long-view policy. By the way, Joe Biden just lost the American Samoa Democratic Caucus. Isn't that interesting? So what stands out is the effectiveness of a long-term, long-view policy. Quote, we did create a long-term pattern here in the EEC. We're looking at the idea of a common exchange market. We already prepared a draft with some experiments. The first step is the creation of information network exchanges in different countries. It was rather successful. The second step will be to set up online communication between exchanges. And finally, we move to a common mechanism of price formation and open this mechanism for all other countries. The main problem is that the major producers of commodities, first of all, the oil companies, they don't like to trade through exchanges. They like to trade personally. So you need to make need a political decision to make sure that at least half of production of commodities should go through exchanges. That is to say, a mechanism where supply and demand balance each other. For the moment, the price of oil in foreign markets is, quote, secret, unquote. It's some type of colonial times thinking, quote, how to cheat, unquote. We must create some legislation to open all this information to the public, unquote. The NEDB, the new development bank, this is the BRICS bank, so called, in need of a shakeup. Paglatziev offered an extensive analysis of the BRICS universe based on how the BRICS Business Council had its first meeting on financial services in February. They agreed on a working plan. There was a first session of fintech experts, and during this week, a breakthrough meeting may lead to a new formulation. For the moment, not made public, to be put into the BRICS agenda for the October summit. Okay, so again, the Kazan summit. Quote, what are the main challenges within the BRICS structure in this next stage of trying to bypass the dollar, unquote? Well, BRICS, in fact, is a club which doesn't have a secretariat. I can tell it from a person that has some experience in integration. We discussed the idea of a customs union here on the post-Soviet territory immediately after the collapse. We had a lot of declarations, even some agreements signed by heads of state over a common economic space. But only after the establishment of a commission, the real work started in the year 2008. After 20 years of papers, conferences, nothing was done. You need someone who's responsible. In BRICS, there is such an organization, the NDB, the New Development Bank. If the heads of state decide to appoint the NDB as an institution which will elaborate the new model, the new currency, organize an international conference with the draft of an international treaty, this can work. The problem is that the NDB works according to the dollar charter. They have to reorganize this institution in order to make it workable. Now it works like an ordinary international development bank under the American framework. The second option would be to do it without this bank, but that would be much more difficult. The bank has enough expertise, unquote. Could an internal shakeup of the NDB be proposed by the Russian presidency of BRICS this year? Quote, we are doing our best. I'm not sure the Ministry of Finance understands how serious this is. The president understands. I personally promoted this idea to him, but the chairman of the central bank and ministers are still thinking in the old IMF paradigm, still thinking in the Western paradigm. Quote, religious sects don't create innovation. Baglatiev had a serious discussion on sanctions with the NDB. Quote, I discussed this issue, with Mrs. Rousseff, the former Brazilian president, currently presiding over the NDB at the St. Petersburg Forum. I gave her a paper about it. She was rather enthusiastic and invited us to come to the NDB. But afterwards, there was no follow-up. Last year, everything was difficult, unquote. On BRICS, quote, the Financial Services Working Group is discussing the reinsurance, credit rating, new currencies, and fintech. That's what should be in the agenda in the NDB. The best possibility would be a meeting in Moscow in March or April to discuss in depth the whole range of issues of BRICS settlement mechanism, from most sophisticated to least sophisticated. It would be great if the NDB sign up for it, but as it stands, there is a de facto gulf between the BRICS and the NDB, unquote. The key point, insists Sergei Glassiev, is that, quote, Dilma Rousseff, that is, should find time to organize these discussions at a high level. A political decision is needed, unquote. Quote, but wouldn't that decision have to come from Putin himself, asks Pepe? Glassiev replies, quote, it's not so easy. We heard statements by at least 3 heads of the state, Russia, South Africa, and Brazil. They publicly said, quote, This is a good idea, unquote. The problem, once again, is there is no task force yet. My idea, which we proposed before the BRIC summit in Johannesburg, is to create an international working group to prepare in the next sessions the model or the draft of the treaty, how to switch to national currencies. That's the official agenda now. And they have to report about that in Kazan for the BRICS annual summit. There are some consultations between the central banks and ministers of finance, unquote. So Glatzioff is pointing out here, this is a complex picture. Many people have to come together. There has to be a task force, okay, that has to be leading this because there are many players and they had to be put together in a broad agreement to basically found the new currency, shake up the bank, discard the Western financial models, and substitute the new BRICS models, okay, for them. Going on, Sergei Glassiev cut to the chase when it comes to the inertia of the system. Quote, the main problem for bureaucrats and experts is, quote, why they don't have ideas, unquote, because they assume the current status quo is the best one. If there are no sanctions, everything will be good. The international financial architecture was created by the United States and Europe is convenient. Everyone knows how to work in the system. So it's impossible to move from this system to another system. For businesses, it will be very difficult. For banks, it will be difficult. People have been educated in a paradigm of financial equilibrium, totally libertarian. They don't care that prices are manipulated by speculators. They don't care about the volatility of national currencies. They think it's natural. It's a kind of religious sect. Religious sects don't create innovation, unquote. I think that last was very, very illuminating. His understanding of how the inertia of the old system still drags on the new system they're trying to create. And that it's not easy. This is not going to be easy for them to create this new system to challenge the supremacy of the dollar. Next section. Now get on that hypersonic bicycle. We're back to the crucial issue of national currencies. Quote, even 5 years ago, when I spoke about the national currencies in trade, everybody said it was completely impossible. We have long-term contracts in dollars and euro. We have an established culture of transactions. When I was Minister of Foreign Trade 30 years ago, at the time, I tried to push all our trade in commodities into rubles. I argued with Yeltsin and others. We have to trade in rubles, not in dollars, quote unquote. That would automatically make the ruble the reserve currency. When Europe moved to the euro, I had a meeting with Mr. Prodi, and we agreed, quote, we will use euro as your currency, and you will use rubles, unquote. Then Prodi came to me about consultations and said, quote, I talked to Mr. Kudrin, former Russian foreign minister, 2000-2011. He didn't ask me to make the ruble a reserve currency, unquote. That was sabotage, says Sergei Glassiev. It was stupidity, unquote. So the stupid is found among many people in many nations, not only here at home. The problems actually run deep and keep running. And quote again, the problem was our regulators, educated by the IMF, and the second problem was corruption. If you trade oil and gas in dollars, a large part of profits is stolen. There are a lot of intermediate companies which actually manipulate prices. Prices are only the first step. The price of natural gas in the first deal is about 10 times less than the final demand. There are institutional barriers. A majority of countries do not allow companies to sell oil and gas to the final customer. Like you cannot sell gas to households. But nevertheless, even in the open market, quite competitive. We have intermediaries between producer and consumer. At least half of the revenues are stolen from government control. They don't pay taxes, unquote. yet fast solutions do exist, and quote again, and was sanctioned 2 years ago. Transfer from US dollar and euro to national currencies took only a few months. It was very quick, unquote. On investments, Sergei Glassiev stressed success and localized trade, but capital flows are still not there. Quote, the central banks are not doing their jobs. The ruble renminbi exchange is working well, but the ruble rupee exchange doesn't work. The banks that keep these rupees, they have a lot of money, accrue interest rates on these rupees, and they can play with them. I don't know who's responsible for this, our central bank or the Indian central bank, unquote. The succinct key takeaway of Glaziev's serious warnings that it would be up to the new development bank, the NDB, prodded by the leadership of BRICS, to organize a conference of global experts and open it up for public discussion. Sergei Glassiev evoked the metaphor of a bicycle. It keeps rolling along. So I invent a new bicycle. Well, the multipolar time has come for a new hypersonic bicycle. A final metaphor introduced by Pepe Escobar, who has a penchant for wonderful metaphors. So that report is like the most complete thing I've seen on the state of the progress towards a new international currency. So I think you should take that article very, very seriously in terms of what is happening and some of the problems that have to be overcome for BRICS to get fully outside of the Western system. A very important article, and I was happy to bring it to you. So, Andy Candy said, me too. I was doing the cha-cha in the kitchen. That was over Newland's resignation. And he says, glad to see you, Kay. Hi, Andy. And Andy says, hi, darling D, you rock. Andy says, Joe, Russia has some MMT, right? Would they be gung-ho over a digital currency? I think the finance minister in Russia has a good deal of knowledge, okay, of MMT. That won't stop them from being gung-ho, okay, over a digital currency. It depends on what the foundation of the digital currency is. If the common currency was in some way a fiat currency, then undoubtedly Russia would support it. It remains to be seen what it's going to be like. And he says, I mean, since they crash in the U.S. All the time. By the way, there was just a crash, okay, of Bitcoin. It lost 12%, I guess, in the last a few days. It hit a peak of $69,000 per Bitcoin, which is, of course, very, very high. Okay, but it's a currency, it's not really a commodity. Very vulnerable to speculators who own huge amounts, okay, of Bitcoin. And so the speculators got in there. They took winnings at this point. And of course, when the speculators take the winnings, the commodity crashes in price. Bitcoin crashed by 12%. Whether that crash has ended or not, I certainly do not know. Okay, on to the final piece for this evening. This is another piece from Pepe Escobar, who is not simply the most valuable of journalists when it comes to the emergence of multipolarity, but he's probably the most entertaining of such journalists as well. And this next piece is both valuable for the information it contains and as well, okay, it is entertaining. So The global south converges to multipolar Moscow is the title of this piece. It's much shorter than the other, only 1,000 words, so it won't be quite as challenging to go through. Here is a picture of Sergei Lavrov, and he is addressing the conference that just took place inside, of Moscow, with the global south converging on multipolar Moscow. It does not identify who these other people are, of course, but there will be information about that. Here's the key takeaway of these frantic days in Moscow. Normalophiles of the world unite. That means those who love a normal world ought to unite. Of course, with what the collective West has been doing now for years and years and years, there has been no normality. In other words, the normality has been chaos in a lot of places inside of the world. So it is relevant to ask the normalophiles of the world to unite. These have been frantic multipolar days at the capital of the multipolar world. So Pepe thinks the capital of the multipolar world is Moscow. I had the honor to tell Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov that virtually the whole global south seemed to be represented in an auditorium of the Lomonosov Innovation Cluster on a Monday afternoon, a sort of informal UN, and in several ways, several aspects, way more effective when it comes to respecting the UN Charter. His eyes gleamed. Lavrov, more than most, understands the true power of the global majority. Moscow hosted a back-to-back multipolar conference plus the second meeting of the International Russophiles Movement, MIR in its acronym in French, which means world in Russian. Yes, mir means world in Russian. I do remember that much of my Russian. That's very old with me. I haven't done anything serious with it, I guess, since about 1970. Anyway, taken together, the discussions and networking have offered auspicious hints on the building of a truly representative international order, far away from the agenda-imposed doom and gloom of a single unipolar culture and forever wars. Oops. The opening plenary session in the first day fell under the star power of Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova, whose main message was crystal clear. Quote, "There can't be freedom without free will," unquote, which could easily become the new collective global South motto. Quote, "Civilization states," unquote, set the tone of the overall discussion as they are meticulously designing the blueprints of economic, technological, and cultural development in the post-Western hegemonic world. That is to say, the post-Western world will not be hegemonic. Professor of International Relations Zhang Weiwei at Fudan University's China Institute in Shanghai summarized the four crucial points when it comes to Beijing propelling its role as a, quote, "new independent pole" that reads like a concise marker of where we are now. One, under the unipolar order, everything from dollars to computer chips can be weaponized. Wars and color revolutions are the norm. Two, China has become the largest economy in the world by PPP, the largest trade and industrial economy, and it is currently at the forefront of the fourth industrial revolution. 3. China proposes a model of, quote, unite and prosper instead of a Western model of, quote, divide and rule, unquote. 4. The West tried to isolate Russia, but the global majority sympathizes with Russia. Thus, the collective West has been isolated by the global rest. That is an interesting set of 4 crucial points. I'm going to repeat them and discuss them. Under the unipolar order, everything from dollars to computer chips can be weaponized. Wars and color revolutions are the norm. Isn't that the world that we are now emerging from, folks? China has become the largest economy in the world by purchasing power parity, PPP, the largest trade and industrial economy, and it is currently at the forefront of the fourth industrial revolution, the automation revolution. 3. China proposes a model of, quote, unite and prosper instead of a Western model of, quote, divide and rule, unquote. Isn't that also the truth and very, very important? And isn't it so that China is marketing the model of unite, and prosper, in contrast to what we in the West, are offering? We have to change because a unite and prosper vision is always more attractive to most of the people than a divide and rule division. The unite and prosper vision is a bottom-up vision. And the divide and rule vision in the international system is a top-down vision. It is anti-democratic. 4. And remember the title of this stream series, Empowering Democracy. 4. The West tried to isolate Russia, but the global majority sympathizes with Russia. Thus, the collective West has been isolated by the global rest. I think that is somewhat true. We're seeing that happen. I don't think it's a done deal yet. But of course, it's what the representatives of the global majority are pushing for. The next section, fighting the theopolitical war, quote, theopolitical war, unquote. Quote, global rest, incidentally, is a misnomer. Global majority is the name of the game, says Pepe. The same applies to, quote, golden billion, unquote, those that profit from the unipolar moment, mostly across the collective West and its comprador elites in the satraps, are at best 200 million or so, versus, of course, the total population of 8.5 billion. Monday afternoon in Moscow featured 3 parallel sessions on China and the multipolar world, where the star was Professor Weiwei on the post-hegemony West under the title, quote, is it possible to save the European civilization, unquote, attended by several dissident, by Europeans, academics, think tankers, activists, and the main treat featuring the frontline actors of multipolarity. I had the honor to moderate, says Pepe, the awesome Global South session, which ran for over 3 hours It could have been the whole day, actually, and featured several stunning presentations by a stellar cast of Africans, Latin Americans, and Asians, from Palestine to Venezuela, including Nelson Mandela's grandson, whose name is Mandla. That was the multipolar global south in full flight, as my imperative was to open the floor to as many people as possible, were the organizers to release the greatest hits of the presentations that could easily become a global hit. Uh, 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 um, uh, um, Mandela Mandela emphasized how it's about time to move away from the unipolar system dominated by the hegemon, quote, which continues to support Israel, unquote. The complimented Benen's charismatic activist, Camille Seba, who brilliantly personifies the African leadership of the future. In the plenary session, Seba introduced a key concept which begs to be developed around the world. We are living under a, quote, theopolitical war, unquote, that neatly summarizes the Western simultaneous hybrid war on Islam, Shiism, Christian Orthodoxy, in fact, every religion apart from the woke cult. I'm not sure what the woke the cult is in the terms of Pepe Escobar. I hope I don't belong to the woke cult. The next day, the Second Congress of the International Russophiles Movement offered 3 debate sessions. The most relevant was on what else? Quote, informational and hybrid warfare. I had the honor to share the stage with Maria Zakharova, and after my free jazz style presentation, focused on over 40 years of practicing journalism across the planet and watching firsthand the utter degradation of the industry, we carried a hopefully useful dialogue on media and soft power. My suggestion, not only to the Russian Foreign Ministry, but to everyone all across the global south, was straightforward. Forget about oligarchy controlled legacy stream media. It is already dead. They have nothing relevant to say. Did you hear that? The New York Times, the Washington Post, MSNBC, Fox, and CNN? The present and the future rely on social media, quote, alternative, unquote, which is not alternative anymore. On the contrary, and citizen media, to all of which, of course, the highest standards of journalism should be applied. In the evening, before everyone got down to party hard, a few of us were invited for an open, frank, and enlightening working dinner with Foreign Minister Lavrov in one of the magnificent frescoed rooms of the Metropole Hotel, one of the grand hotels of Europe since 1905. The next section is called A Legend with a Wicked Sense of Humor. Lavrov was relaxed among friends. After an initial stunning diplomatic tour de force, which covered quite a few highlights of the recent decades all the way to the current gloom and doom, he opened the table to our questions, taking notes and answering each one of them in detail. What's so striking when you're face to face with the most legendary diplomat in the world for quite some time in a relaxed setting is his genuine sadness when faced with the rage, intolerance, and total absence of critical thought which is exhibited especially by the Europeans. That was much more relevant throughout our conversation than the fact that U.S. Russia relations are at an all time low. Lavrov, though, remains highly driven because of the global South, global majority, and the Russian presidency of the BRICS this year. He hugely praised Indian Foreign Minister Jaishankar and the comprehensive relations with China. He suggested the Russophiles movement should take a global role, playfully suggesting we should all be part of a quote, normalophile, unquote, movement. Well, Lavrov, the legend, is also known for his wicked sense of humor, and humor is more effective when it is deadly serious. So here's the key takeaway of these frantic days in Moscow. Normalophiles of the world unite. And that is the way Pepe ends that magnificent piece, okay, of journalism. Two magnificent pieces, okay, of journalism here that contain a vision of hope for the world. So, in this stream, we have moved from the depths of the diplomacy surrounding the genocide, okay, in Gaza, to the vision of unity and prosperity, which is offered by the BRICS in the context of, okay, the multipolar world. I have said in previous contexts that okay, I've said, okay, in previous contexts that multipolar worlds based often, okay, on the balance of power, historically based, okay, on the balance of power, have not been worlds which are united and prosper for long. In the 19th century in Europe, saw tremendous oppression and class conflicts in the various countries that were advancing, yes, economically advancing, tremendously advancing and benefiting generally from the global peace. But there were the revolutions of 1830 and 1848 and 1870 in that historical period, and there was the Crimean War of 1854, very, very ruinous wars. And there were the pogroms, okay, in Europe, and the breakdown of social structures, and the preparations for the First World War, which was a devastating development. To have a multipolar world, okay, is not enough. That multipolar world must have institutional structures that bring, okay, the peace. I do think it's very promising that the BRICS institution, the New Development Bank, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and all the structures being created by the collaboration of Russia and China and India, okay, and Iran, the countries, okay, of Western Asia, they're creating new institutions that allow for collaboration, and they allow for collaboration with and through the UN, okay, as well, if the UN can be forged into a useful environment. At this writing, that remains to be seen. But the hope for the world is that these institutions can condition the situation of multipolarity so that it is not eventually characterized by the great power conflict that came to consume Europe finally at the end of the 19th century. This, of course, would be great power conflict on a much larger stage and a much more ruinous great power conflict if it comes to pass. So these new institutions, in the context of multipolarity, it is crucial how they are formed and what the spirit is behind them and how they are embraced. Because if things are done right and the institutions remain open or become open to the rest of the world, including those nations that remain outside of these new developments, and if these nations are eventually included, in the new developments, we might well see in due time, it is a matter of decades, the emergence of a successful world government from what we are building now. That is ultimately what we are going to need to see the end of great power conflicts. So I will go over your final comments now. Andy Candy says, Joe, Russia has some MMT, right? I guess I read that before. Andy Candy says, Pepe writes so fluently, considering his accent. I'd never guess he's the author-writer. Well, when I listen to him, I I don't see much difference, actually. He seems to me very, very fluent also. He has an accent in English, of course. He probably has an accent in Russian as well. But he has this very jazzy journalistic style, of his own. And he makes great use, of idiom. He seems to be a master of idiom cross-culturally, not only in Western idiom and English, and the kind of idiom that has arisen, in American civilizations, but he seems to be pretty good, at idioms in a European cultural context and a Russian cultural context as well. And God knows whether he's gained any fluency in the Chinese cultural context, because he's visiting there very, very frequently as well. And of course, all across Asia. He travels all across Asia. He himself is helping to forge a Eurasian culture. It is very interesting. Andy Candy says, that reminds me, Temu is 25% off on Cash App Boost. I had $12 on my card, and I paid about $7.68 for Fantastic Things for the Twins. I hope you love the Fantastic Things, Andy. Kay says, hi, Steve. And Andy Candy says, Pepe looks like a Rembrandt painting. Laugh out loud. Yes, he does. He is but to my mind, he's a very lovable character. So.
Didn't the Japanese start using the MMT and do very well?
No, not really. The Japanese experience has been consistent, with what MMT would expect. So it's a very good illustration of what happens if you ignore certain of the principles of the dominant paradigm, okay, in economics, and do your thing. For example, the debt to G ratio, the debt, okay, to GDP ratio in Japan is, well, I haven't checked it recently. It's somewhere between 250% and 270%. Okay, now according to the Western economists, that whole economy should be collapsing because, okay, a debt to GDP ratio of that sort is unsustainable. Okay, but the Japanese have proven empirically that it is not unsustainable, and since so many other countries, as you would expect from MMT principles, have much lower debt to GDP ratios, they can also conclude that the problem of the debt, okay, to GDP, or the problem, okay, the level to the debt, is not really a problem at all when you're a monetary sovereign, okay, as the Japanese are. And so the Japanese have empirically proved that, okay, but MMT had predicted that this would be the case. Oh, Nikki Haley won one primary anyway, Vermont. Uh, so, uh, yeah, that's an extreme case of something happening that would have been predicted, okay, by MMT, and that showed something very important, which is one of my favorite things also, okay, and that is that uh, one thing that MMT says is, okay, the level of the national debt has no significance for the fiscal sustainability of a monetary sovereign. And the level of the debt, okay, to GDP ratio also has no significance for fiscal sustainability, okay, of a monetary sovereign. That means that all the BS you've been hearing these last few weeks in Congress about how terrible it is that our debt is so high and the sky is falling. They've been talking about how the sky is falling because the debt is so high since the time of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the 1930s. And the sky has never fallen. And it's never fallen because the United States is a monetary sovereign. And all those people in Congress, especially Tommy Tuberville, by the way, I mentioned the streams, okay, of Lena Petrova. I guess, okay, it's Elena Petrova. Okay, I mentioned the stream that she had about digital currency today. Well, she recently had a really ridiculous stream as well, where she was spouting the ideology of, Peter G. Peterson, and the ideology of, uh, uh, of austerity, a real debt terrorism kind of stream about how there's going to be a reckoning and the United States economy is going to collapse. All I have to say about that is the only way the U.S. economy is going to collapse is if the Congress stupidly believes that there's some limit, uh, that there's some fiscal limit to the spending of the United States that is not a function of the outcome of that spending. In other words, something inherent because some standard is violated, like, too high a debt to GDP ratio or too high, okay, a national debt. There's no such thing. It's all about the consequences of the spending. It has nothing to do with, okay, the debt. This can be proven, by the way, by using either overt congressional financing or using platinum coin seniorage to pay off the debt, okay, over time. If you do that, it will be shown that, okay, for the monetary sovereign, okay, the level of debt has nothing to do with fiscal sustainability. It's all about, rather, the outcomes of the spending. It's not about the money printing, okay, or the money creation. It's all about the outcome of the spending. If the spending creates inflation, there's going to be a problem. But there are ways to condition the spending, ways to spend on the right things so that you don't get, inflation, or get only very moderate inflation, 1%, 2%, maybe 3% a year. You can have full employment and price, stability. You can have unity at the national level and get prosperity too. That, is easy. K. Ryan says, Andy Kenny says, I want to know more about American Samoa kicking Biden the butcher to the curb. Uh, yeah, Genocide Joe. And K. Ryan says, I refuse to listen to Rump. I can understand that too. I refuse to listen to him also, but we have to listen to him because he's getting increasingly crazy. And believe me, there will be manifestations of great violence before this is over. There will be great violence if he loses, and there will be great violence if he wins. Because if he wins, he will initiate violence shortly thereafter. You can count on that. And Andy Candy says, Nikki won DC 2. And Kay Ryan says, yes, she did. So she won American Samoa, and she won DC, and she won Vermont. Did she win anywhere else? I don't know. I suppose Trump swept in Texas, right? I haven't even been following the Republican primaries because it seems to me Trump has it all locked up. So where's the drama? Okay. I think what mattered here is how the court cases were going to affect Donald Trump. If, for example, the Supreme Court had not come forth with its ridiculous opinion, stopping states from throwing him off the ballot, an extremely biased opinion. It was just so biased, it was absolutely ridiculous. And it's completely based on a misreading of the 14th Amendment, a willful misreading of the 14th Amendment. They wanted not to throw Trump out. They want not to decide whether he can be a convicted criminal before the election. They want to have him as president, and they want to have another 4 years of nonsense for him, from him, so they can cement their control of the Supreme Court, so they can stop any expansion of the Supreme Court, whatever. They want him to be the president again, as criminal and as crooked as he is. And that's why they're deciding the cases in the way they're deciding the cases. Now, they may not be able to decide, the immunity case in time for him to be convicted of crime so that he can go into the election as the convicted felon that he ought to be. But at the same time, there is a scenario, or there was a scenario, that he could be convicted in time for his run for the nomination of the Republican Party could be damaged. Now, it doesn't look like that is going to be possible. But that's obviously what Nikki has been playing for. She's playing for a situation where Trump doesn't survive the legal challenges, where he either goes broke because there's so much in fines against him, or he actually gets convicted of a felony, okay, and has to be sent, okay, to jail before he becomes the president of the United States. And then what are the Republicans going to do? They're going to have to hurriedly nominate somebody else for election day. That's what she's been playing for. She didn't expect to win on Super Tuesday. She's just trying to hang in there and get, the contributors going again. Raskin said he'll do something in the Senate about getting Trump off the ballots. Well, that's interesting because Raskin is in the House. He's not, okay, in the Senate. And I don't think he's going to be able to do anything in the Senate, or they can do anything in the Senate alone to get Trump off the ballots. They have to pass a law in order to get him off the ballots. And I'd say the way the Supreme Court is operating, not only would they have to pass a law, which would mean getting all the Democrats in the House in back of the law, and probably 10 to 15 of the Republicans as well, in order to get it past the House, and then it also get it past the Senate. But that law had better have an exceptions clause so the Supreme Court is not able to review it. If it doesn't have the exceptions clause, it's going to be a futile endeavor because the Supreme Court will just declare it unconstitutional and Trump will be on the ballot anyway. So Raskin has to realize that. I understand he's moving in some particular way, and he's a formidable constitutional scholar, so he's going to have some ideas about this, and he knows about the exceptions clause. But still, he's got to get it through the House and through the Senate with an exceptions clause so the Supreme Court can't do anything about it. Because otherwise, they will do something about it. Now, they can probably arrange to do something where they get rid of the filibuster. In other words, they have an exemption of the filibuster for this in the Senate. That can be done. They can use the nuclear option for this one thing to get it through the Senate. But getting it through the House, they need Republicans. They don't need many because the House is very close now. There are like 3 or 4 votes, in the balance. So if 3 or 4 of the Republicans will go along to get Trump off the ballot, but who would those Republicans be? Okay, remember, Cheney is no longer a member of the House. Adam Kinzinger is no longer, a member of the House. So who would be the people who would join the Democrats to get Trump off the ballot, and who would pass a law with an exceptions clause so the Supreme Court would have to have hands off? And all this has to get to be done very quickly. I think it's a very, very long shot. A very, very long shot. I think we're going to have to beat Trump, at the polls. And I think the only way this can be done is, first of all, Biden has to drop the F out.
Yes.
Second of all, Kamala has to be persuaded not to make any noise because she would be a total failure against Trump. He would rip her up one side down the other. If we're looking at realistic people who could beat Trump and who you might be able to make sufficiently well known enough by election day, you're probably talking about you're probably talking about 4 people. One is Gavin Newsom. It would not be good if they ended up with him.
Mm-hmm.
Second possibility is Gretchen Whitmer. She's a member of the establishment. She doesn't know any MMT. Uh, she's sort of centrist, but I have the feeling she's not as corrupt as Gavin Newsom. We love you 2K. The third is Jeff Merkley, who's a real sleeper. He hasn't offended anybody, but he would offer a very attractive platform because he would basically copy the Bernie Sanders platform. Wherever Bernie is, Jeff is right behind him. Now, Jeff has never stepped in front of him before, but if the DNC really wanted to win, Jeff would be a good guy to nominate. And Trump would not do well against the very calm individual that Jeff Merkley is, and a very strong individual too. Is Merkley old? No. He's let me Google that while we're talking. He is 67. So while he's not a young man, he is younger than Bobby Kennedy. I think he's in pretty good shape, too. And he says, well, before I mention the fourth person who could win against Trump, of course, that person is still Bernie Sanders. He could rip Trump, okay, a new one. He always could. And he still can. But would the DNC ever nominate Bernie Sanders? No. They would never nominate Bernie Sanders. But if they nominated him, he'd win. And they'd win. I got 24 people here. I only got 2 likes. How come? I've had over 20 people here for most of this stream. I got only 2 likes. Please like, share, and subscribe. That's very important for the stream. So do me that favor in the time remaining. Thank you very much. Are there any more comments? Well, thank you all for coming. Tomorrow, I'll be back with streams about Dump the Corruption. I'm not sure exactly what I'll cover yet. I've got a whole host of things to cover. There's so much news going on, so much happening. And I got to look at it all from the lens of Dump the Corruption, which I will certainly do. And he says Bernie can't run independently. I don't think there's any time for that. If Bernie's going to run, he has to be selected by the Democratic Party at long last. They have to realize that Bernie is the most certain opponent who can beat Trump. They have to decide that they can love Bernie enough. Well, I should say that they hate Trump a lot more than they hate Bernie. Of course, that's the problem. The problem with the DNC. They are authoritarians. So really, they like Trump more than they like Bernie. What they don't understand is that some of them, some of the DNC, will be going to concentration camps if Trump creates his dictatorship this time around, which I believe he has a very good chance of doing, because I don't think the Supreme Court is going to stop him.
And he talked about it.
Yeah, he talked about it. But if you consider the way the Supreme Court has been acting, they're obviously afraid of the potential in of violence created by Donald Trump. They were afraid to leave it to the states. I mean, the idea that this would result in chaos because every state across the nation would be disqualifying somebody else for the presidency was ridiculous. The 14th Amendment only allowed taking off the ballot somebody who committed an insurrection, who was part of an insurrection. They couldn't use a decision sustaining that to apply it generally to every candidate. So that was bullcrap. What the Supreme Court did was bullcrap. I'll probably go over that in some more detail on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Pretty good possibility. Andy says, okay, the millennials are sick of oldies. I know they're sick of oldies. The youngest person we've talked about here tonight as a possibility for the presidency is Gretchen Whitmer. I think she's at most in her 50s. I can Google that too. Gretchen Whitmer. One reason why Gretchen Whitmer is good, of course, is that the Palestinian people in Michigan do not hate her. She's 52 years old. 52 years old. Serving as the 49th governor of Michigan since 2019. She seems like a pleasant, nice person who doesn't make too many enemies except those on the extreme right who at one point thought that they would try to kill her. But that's for another show. Andy says, Bernie can't run independently. God, folks, I still have only 2 likes, and there are 24 of you here. How does that happen? Okay, Andy says, fantastic show tonight. I loved it. Well, you were the one who asked me to continue long shows on Tuesday. It was basically you and Lisa Theobald and Steve and Kay who got me to do it. Andy says SCOTUSes are asking for security money for their homes from the Fed. Sure they are. They need security with the decisions they've made. Of course they need security. Andy says, I see 6 likes. Okay, very good. Thank you, Andy. 6 likes is much better than 2. But all I see on the interface here is 2. That may be because it's picking up only one of the sources. Or maybe it's just slow in, recording the likes. Anyway, it's time for me to say goodnight. She says, I love the in-depth shows like this. So do I. My heart is with the in-depth shows. And I'd still be doing them if we generally got on the in-depth shows as many views as we have tonight, where I'm looking at, 24 views still here, 24 viewers who are still here. I never would have done something different than the in-depth shows on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. I would have gone on with the in-depth shows. and try to grow the in-depth shows. I love the in-depth shows. I can just do much better. I just have a much longer time to, deal with questions. Uh, so I love them too, but I still have to continue with the experiments on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday and see how they do because a whole bunch of people are being very successful with half-hour shows, and I need to have an audience, and I need to have greater economic success with these particular streams. Uh, so, thank you all very much for coming and for staying. Whether I can see you or not, okay, in the comments. Okay, I think Andy makes up for a lot of people herself. Andy says, I understand, Joe. I love the short stuff too. Well, thank you. I haven't done any real short stuff yet. Most of them are between 20 and 30 minutes. I don't know if I've had one that's less than 20 minutes yet. So there it is. But thank you all for coming. I'm going to say good night now. And as I say, I'll see you tomorrow with Empowering Democracy with some Dump the Corruption shows. Thanks a lot.